Hi, my name is Abubakar Salim, and I am the CEO and creative director of SURGENT Studios.
Hi, I'm Dominic Hodge. I'm the narrative designer at SURGENT Studios.
Dom and I are actually best friends in real life, sadly. We met at secondary school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we talked to each other in like year 7 and 8.
No, but all right, here's a story for you. There was this group of people, this group of boys who asked for Dominic Hodge. And me being nice, I directed them to Dominic Hodge. They ended up being bullies who then ended up, did they start beating you up?
Oh, they beat the
They were beating you up. But I saved you though.
You did save me, yeah.
I did
that was in front of we had a little swimming pool at school. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was our first interaction.
That was
you
first,
guiding
thugs.
But
I saved you after, but I didn't know that they were thugs in the first place. So I ended up saving you from said thugs.
I completely forgot about that. That was the first time we met.
That was the first time we met, mate. So look at our friendship now, blossomed. You know, toxic and abusive as it is today.
Yeah. But yeah, since then, I think that must have been like the very beginning of year 9 or something. So yeah, that would be 2006.
Mate, Lord, it was long ago.
Yeah.
Long ago.
So we've known each other ever since, really. And
just got on and just, mainly specifically really on, as I say, like, you know, with stories, you know, playing D&D together, doing a lot of that. As well, playing games, like everything, man. Like we've just been back and forth chatting.
Yeah, exactly. And like we've both been in different walks of life and kind of not drifted apart, but moved in different circles for a while and then like kept kind of intersecting and moving about like, oh, what are you doing at the moment? What are you doing at the moment? And then, eventually it converged to this.
Conversion to this now, yeah. I mean, we've always kind of said as well, like we've wanted to work together in a professional space, doing what we want to do. Yeah. And I think this was it, right?
Yeah, I mean, this was the dream.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It was really early days. This was even before we'd actually signed with EA. We ended up needing a writer. And first person that came into mind actually was Dom, because I remember when we were growing up, we'd do a lot of writing ourselves, be it either, you know, for either stories or whatever. And I remember calling you up and being like, hey man, where were you at the time? I think you were working at a day, was it a nursery?
So I was working at a nursery, like a Busy Bees nursery after uni. Yeah. So I was doing casual hours there and then doing like film and TV running. So I did like stuff on Gangs of London and War of the Worlds and all that.
Because you just finished uni, right? In regards to like,
relatively speaking, it wasn't that far after uni. And I think you called me out of the blue. I think I was busy. It was lockdown 1. I'd just been stripped of my furlough. Yeah. So I was essentially unemployed. And I was playing Call of Duty Warzone. Yeah. You called me. I died while you were calling. While we were on the phone. Actually, I'll never forgive that.
All right. Loss. Well, hold that to you. Hold that to me till you die, then, mate.
And you were just chatting to me about the game and stuff and about the ideas that you had. And then I think you just said like, oh, so what are you doing at the moment? And I said, well, and I explained the furlough thing. And I think you said, yeah, come on board. And I started off doing world building, and exclusively world building. Yeah. So it was just, we have the idea or the kernels of a story, but we need the fleshed out world. And, you know, you had a lot of kind of ideas about what the world takes place in with Kenzera. Back when it was spelled with an A.
With an A.
In the old days. And like, you know, we have these tribes, but we don't know what we're doing with them. We got basic ideas, but come aboard and world build. And I remember for a few weeks, I was kind of separate from the company. Yeah. And I was just kind of building these things, then giving you the supplementals, and then you were taking them to the studio. And then eventually, I think you just said, dude, just come into a meeting. Yeah. And then I've been stuck here ever since.
I know. That's normally how I get people in, get them to work behind the scenes and then just slowly be like, hey, why don't you just sit in this meeting? And before you know it, you've signed on board.
Yeah, but I mean, at the time, like, obviously I was over the moon of being able to work with you, but I don't think I think we talked about this a couple of weeks back, that I didn't really put it into context how life-changing it would be. Like going from doing like film and TV running and looking after babies to sitting here talking about a game. Like, it's so bizarre.
It's surreal, isn't it? Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much the process. It was a little bit messy, a little bit kind of sporadic.
But I think that's the case with any sort of startup though, or any idea that you care about. It is kind of, you just want to do it to begin with, right? And then, you know, the idea of structure and plan and the formalities kind of naturally come in place, and also, you know, actively. But I do remember also, I remember having you, I mean, this is like several, you know, this is down the line when you were in the company, having you round and just having to redo the story several times, just because of either like design constraints or whatever, or trying to, you know, scope it down, and even those were messy, but they were needed, and it was good because then we got things done, great. You know? Yeah. You know, with the whole writing process, and I don't know if, I'm sure you'd agree on this, man, like it kind of, we were discovering it as we were going along, right? It didn't work and come just like straight away. No. Right? It was something that was built over time. Yeah. Because we've had, you know, various rewrites throughout the time, I would say probably about 4 or 5 like major milestone rewrites where we'd sit down and go, this isn't working, and it's not working because of this. But there have been some constants. And when you brought me in, we knew some things were certain. We knew there was a boy called Zau. We knew that he'd lost a parent because obviously in the first run it was his mum. So we knew there was a Zau. We knew he'd lost a parent, and we knew he was going to be guided in some way by a deity, some kind of god, and we knew it'd be Bantu mythology. But beyond that, the story is completely day and night, I think, from what it was in the first run. I think we were aiming for this kind of Epic of Gilgamesh type scale where we were like mythology first, story after, character after. Yeah. And, you know, looking back, and, you know, we talked about this on the last rewrite, it was never going to work. Like, and I think the reason why it wasn't going to work was because I just think it just didn't, it felt too epic for the sake of epic. Sure. There's no form of, like, we didn't really feel it. Like, it was cool, but then it's like, you can't really run on cool, can you? You know? Yeah. I think we were being inspired by the wrong things. Yes. Like, I think we were looking at something at the, you know, me and you have always been like obsessed with mythologies, right? So we were looking at Greek mythology and Norse mythology, obviously Bantu mythology, and you know, etc. But I think we were looking at it from almost the big kind of cosmological process of it. Like, oh, these gods fought the Titans, and look how epic that is, look how big that is. When really, I think at first we lost sight, or we missed that Greek mythology is only really good because it's the characters. It doesn't actually matter whether they're fighting Titans or not. What matters is Prometheus strapped to the rock. Yeah, it's the character of Prometheus. It's the character care about, and not I think, the event that. And it's the same thing, you know, all in all with all the other mythologies. I think even with, like, you know, you look at Bantu mythology and the gods that they have. Like, it's not about like the cool stuff that they can do. It's about their relationships with one another or with the world itself. And I think like it comes down to the character, and I think and the soul of it. And I think that's, you know, our final rendition, or the piece that we've fallen onto now, which we kind of universally were like, yeah, this is it, was when we really brought it home, and we really were like, what is this story about? Well, it's about this kid's journey through grief. Yeah. Because I think that taps into the process in itself, right? At its core, how me and you have always worked together is lay everything out on the table, what has to go. Yeah. And we can't be sentimental or emotional about things. Like, there were aspects of this game that at the time, you know, I was extremely kind of shut us down with it, going like, we're not getting rid of this, because that's a fundamental, that's a foundation of the game. If we get rid of that, the whole story falls apart. Like, looking back at it, no, it didn't. No, it was just this little background thing where we were like, oh, that's really cool world building. Yeah. But did it serve the character? Did it serve the theme? And I think over this writing process, me and you have become more mature to seeing what's the fundamental, and it's the character. And we're now at a point with the story where it's like, we're not being distracted anymore. No.
Like, this is the story of the boy because that was the first constant. You know, this is the story of grief because that was the first constant. Everything else is supplemental. Everything else is secondary. And I think it took a while to get there because we were kind of finding our feet with the process. And, you know, on top of everything else that we're working out, like but how's the story going to play as a game? How's it going to look as a game?
And it's funny, actually, I do think that with us, I think we were both very afraid of just making a game just solely based on grief. I think that I remember there was moments where we would constantly say, like, look, yes, it is about grief, but we've also got to think about this, we've also got to think about that. And I think we were kind of trying almost to skirt around the vulnerability aspect of it all. And as soon as we kind of dived into it, we ended up figuring out that actually it's more than just about grief. Do you know what I mean? It isn't just this one color. And I think
we were worried, right?
Yeah, we were. Like, I think, you're right.
We didn't want to be seen as the game that comes out that's a bit Oscar baity.
Yeah,
you know, it's like, oh, this is the game about grief, and it's going to be up for BAFTAs.
Yeah, no.
Hopefully. You know, I think there was a fear of that, right? Because me and you have talked all the time about, like, oh, I'm not going to name and shame Oscar-winning movies, but there are movies that come out and you go, like, I know why you did that. Yeah, you did it so that the Academy could see you.
Yeah,
and I guess we were worried about that, and also it was trying to understand, I think, what we were trying to say about grief as well.
Yeah,
it was a struggle.
It is,
you know, like, you know, not delving into like personal stuff or whatever, but like, you know, my experience of grief through you was secondhand, right? And then I had personal stuff happen last year, and I think, you know what I mean when I say this, like, it helped me understand where we were originally trying to get it.
Yeah.
And I remember coming in after I took some leave and I said, like, nah, man, I get it now.
Yeah.
We need to do this, this, and this, and this.
Yeah.
This is what's important. None of that.
Yeah.
I think we grew confident in the idea.
I think at
the beginning we weren't
confident in it. And it's a funny one because, again, I think, as you know, like, it's a feeling that, sadly, you know, it's one of those things where I think people do understand it and do feel it, but really, truly, once you've kind of experienced it quite close, it almost transforms you and you see a different side of it. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
And I think, especially for us, it was one of those, and, you know, for me anyway, you know, trying to convey this just alone, it's difficult, right? It's hard because, again, my experience is very different to what you've gone through, and, you know, what, you know, you've gone through is different to someone else as well. So, but at least we kind of weirdly share this common journey or this idea of it that we can then communicate that within the story that we're trying to build. You know?
I think the process aligned itself a lot more after what happened, and after us kind of, I remember we had a sit down chat about it and just went, like, it was that understanding that we finally get each other, right? Because I've never had to experience the grief in that way. And then the process then became, I mean, looking at it now, it's easy to look at all of the stuff in the game and I see your situations and what you had to go through. I see my situation, what my partner had to go through. And I can see it all kind of anecdotally flowing through the game now.
Yes.
Whereas I think before it was an idea of grief, and that was the process before. It's like, okay, what do people who grieve feel like? They feel sad. You know, it was a little bit elementary and it wasn't just getting to that point. And it took a while, and it took a lot of iteration. It took a lot of revision of dialogue, but I think we got there.
Yeah. Oh no, 100%. I think it's a funny thing. Like, you know, I know whenever people ask, like, how do you know when something's done or when you feel, you know, ready to show something? And I don't think you ever do, but you feel comfortable with it. And that's when you're like, okay, this is it. You know, I think, again, you know, if you were to ask me if, you know, the story of ZAU is finished, I feel like there's definitely rooms for improvement or definitely spaces to kind of grow. But I feel so much more confident and comfortable with the story that we are giving now than I did when we were, you know, kind of in the when we thought we had it. Do you know what I mean? Back in the day,
imagine it. I couldn't imagine releasing this game with the first iteration of the story. Right. Looking back at it, it's, you know, it's like cave paintings. You know, like I don't know what we were trying to achieve. But we weren't hitting that mark. That sounds very negative. Like, we had a good time.
We had a good time. Yeah, definitely. But it just, I know exactly what you mean, though, man. But I think that was the beauty of the process of it all.
Yeah.
when I remember when I lost my dad, there was this feeling of, I don't know where to speak or talk about it as a man. And I feel like, you know, at the time I was like, no, I've got to be an adult now. I'm now the man of the house. And this feeling, this immense sense of pressure that hit me from this angle, I guess, it's crazy to think that this is still happening today. Yeah. And I think, like, you know, one of the things which I know, I mean, with you is different, right? Because we're so close, I think we can generally be open and actually feel and talk a lot about how we feel, you know? And whereas I feel like actually when it came to the outside world or everyone else, I had to bottle it up a lot. And I had to really kind of just, you know, put a brave face on, you know? I think actually after my dad died, I think I was at drama school and I ended up doing like a show like 2 days after putting him in the ground. And I remember just thinking to myself, yeah, just got to keep soldiering on, and never really kind of taking in what was going on, you know? And I think, you know, it's still one of those things which we kind of feel a bit ashamed about, in the sense of, and I'm not saying this is a particularly a man thing, I just think that there is this sense of, nope, you know, other people out there are having a harder time than you, so you shouldn't feel sad.
Oh, sure. But
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we brought up how much we detest that phrase?
Do you know what I mean?
Like, I think you're right. Like with grief, like, you know, I mean, it's quite literally timeless, right?
Yeah.
Like, not to go all kind of into
airy-fairy with it.
Yeah, airy-fairy, but, you know, like, as human beings, been dealing with grief since the very beginning. Yeah. Right? Like, you know.
And I think this is the thing, and I think, like, this is why it is, of course, a conversation that we will, you know, continue to have, because I remember, you know, again, someone telling me that you'll never really get over the feeling of the loss of a father, but you'll get used to it. And, you know, I totally see that. And I think actually the reason why I feel like this game is timely is because it is about accepting that sometimes it's good, it's all right to feel shit.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Because I think that's the core theme that we ended on, right? Was like, I don't understand why grief is like a taboo.
It is a bit.
You know, and when you have people talk to you about it and you have dealt with things, it's like they're saying all the cliches, they're saying all the things that they expect that you need to hear. But, you know, without sounding too kind of negative about people, but it's like, it's almost like they're waiting for it. Like grief has an expiration date.
Yeah, when is it gonna end?
Right,
and
when's
then we
the
can get on
point?
Exactly.
Like, probably by next April you'll no longer be grieving.
Yeah.
And I just think grief is like evolving, right? Yeah. It's like taking on this different form all the time.
Yeah.
But yet we have this continuous taboo about it. Well, you know, your father passed away years ago, so you can't be that sad anymore. And it's like, who
are you?
Like, what? Even if they don't say it, you can see it.
And I think that's
you can see it in culture, and you can see it in society. That's like, all right, you know, pick yourself up. Like, well, what does that mean?
Exactly.
To pick yourself up.
And I think this is still a thing of today. And I feel like this is also another thing that I realize that, you know, especially when it comes to making, you know, telling this story and sharing this game and making this game and going through it, like, you know, there's also a big reason as to why we've got these two different time frames, right? We've got the sort of like the future, and then we've also got like this back in sort of fantastical times, is because it is that showing of it's timeless. It's a thing that everyone experiences, and you know, you will go through it someday, but it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's when you're ready. And I think actually by what we've built or what we're trying to say or what we're trying to give out there, it's a feeling of like, yeah, feel what you got to feel. Because I think a lot, you know, in today's world, I feel like sometimes you're almost, your feelings are almost taken away from you, or your right to feel upset or angry is taken away from you. Because they're like, oh, but yeah, you don't deserve to feel that way.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's at its key. I think that's why, you know, that's why we made the game. That's why we wrote the story. Is, you know, it's important to make that distinction. We're not saying that the core theme of the game, like, you know, we use the motif of show me you're ready. Right? Yeah. And that's not to say show me you're ready to move on. And that's the distinction. That's the difference.
That is the difference.
We're not saying you don't have to move on.
No.
In fact, you shouldn't. We encourage you to sit with it.
Yeah.
You know,
and that is it.
Mull.
And I think that's really true. I think, like, you know, even thinking about it, it's like, it's it's show me you're ready to go on this journey. Yeah. Show me you're ready to kind of accept that this is what's happened and kind of go on the journey with it. Not to necessarily, as you say, like move on or accept it. Because I know from day one, we've always said this 5 stages of grief doesn't make any, it's not true.
No.
Right?
We even played with that in the process. Right?
Yeah, we did.
At one point, we tried to frame the acts around the stages, and we just found
it doesn't work
through the kind of realization of
that's not real.
Mustard. No.
Yeah, and I think that is something that I feel is, and again, I think it's not necessarily that we need to create tools to or show tools of how to kind of get over grief. I don't think that's the case. I think it's more about, it's the first step of being like, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Now my journey begins.
That's
the way I see it now. Like, and I think that comes with being a parent. I think that comes with losing a parent. That's a world that we get told we have to be ready to prepare ourselves for, but how the hell do you prepare for that?
Yeah.
And when that happens, and the moment it happens, the old you's gone, and now there's a new you, and you have to try and find who that person is.
Figure out who that person is, yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the journey. In terms of the timeliness of the story, I don't think that's ever going to go away for anyone.
No.
Ever. That's something we can't fix, and unless we find a way to cheat death, it's going to be here forever.
Cut to like 22 or whatever the fuck.
This will be edited at one point.
You know what I mean?
Just like, they were wrong.
They were wrong.
Obviously, me and you are world builders, step one. So we're always going to be citing references from things like Mass Effect.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
At the time when we were kind of making it of more of an epic, we were talking a lot about Zelda.
Yes.
And the themes of Zelda, because I think Zelda does a really good job of having quite understated themes. And they still keep that kind of childhood feeling, but then they are touching on things like death and reincarnation and rebirth and tragedy. Even in the new, in Tears of the Kingdom, they deal with that very well. Where it still feels just, Legend of Zelda-y enough, but there is themes of death and grief.
Absolutely. Sacrifice, really.
Yeah. You and me talked a lot about Hellblade in all the years of development. We've talked about Hellblade and the way it deals with human trauma.
Yeah. I think they just found a very fascinating and interesting way of conveying something so deep within a sort of a world which everyone sees as a fantastical, cool space to be in. Do you know what I mean? And I think when actually, it felt very human rather than very removed as a whole. I think I think that's what we love about really well-crafted, good worlds. I mean, you look at things like Lord of the Rings, for example. Even though it is kind of fable-y, there are elements of it that feel grounded in a sense of you can relate to it to a degree. Sure. And I think these worlds allow you as an audience member to find yourself in them. Like, where do you belong? I think that's what's great about D&D, right? Sure. You play in these worlds which, of course, you make the characters and whatnot, but you are creating these characters with aspects of yourself to a degree, or aspects that you wish you had, or aspects that you wish you didn't have, and you play it within these spaces. And I think that's where I feel, really good writing kind of hits home. It isn't really for the self. It's more so for a sense of like, hey, as an audience, where do you see yourself in this space? Sure. I think that's crucial, and something we stuck out of, I think, from day dot was there's no point in having a really great world if the characters don't breathe and live, and that you can feel like you could be part of that journey. I'm not going to go into Lord of the Rings because we'll be here for hours, right? But you're right in that sense that, like, I'm a massive Lord of the Rings fan. Yeah.
Middle Earth is probably one of the greatest worlds ever created in fiction, but it's only as good as the characters were. And I think that's something we try to do. And, everyone's got a long way to go before they can reach the kind of stages of like Tolkien and stuff like that. But he understood fundamentally that the characters suit the world and serve the world.
Yes.
And that the world has to serve the characters. Yeah. One can't exist without the other. There's no point in creating this beautiful, this kind of beautiful backdrop and then having really bland 2D characters that you can't relate to. And so I think when I think about influences, it's going to be anyone that takes character over the world.
Yeah.
Because in TOE, if the characters are good enough, I will be invested in it.
Yeah.
I mean, for years we've talked about how hit and miss we are with fantasy.
Yeah.
You know, when you start getting to like, oh, welcome to the city of Azarabia and the kingdom
Azarabia.
I don't know, I'm just coming up with names, man. I can't think of any names. I'm not on the clock. You know, and they start coming up with all these random fantasy worlds and fantasy names, and and there's like 10 ages for the great 10 dragons, and it's like none of this none of this means anything to me. I'm not going to remember it, right? What I am going to remember is, you know, the young buck who, like, you know, he has to find his place, and he has to, you know, find his journey, and he meets these great characters, and goes, now I'm going to relate to it because he's going to those places. Not the places themselves.
He's essentially the shoes that you're going to be wearing in this journey that you're going to be seeing for the first time as they are.
Yes.
This cool, new, exciting world.
Through a thematic lens as well, which is important. Like, don't get me wrong, I like Ikakarumba and I was about to call it Lagbara then.
Oh, wow.
So it's because we're talking about the past of writing. It's throwing me out. And It's Shocker and stuff like that, right? Like, I love these places because, you know, we spent a lot of time on these places, but they are meaningless without ZAU. We have to see those places through the lens of ZAU because he sees it through grief.
Yeah, exactly.
And if he wasn't there, they're just villages.
They're just spaces.
Yeah.
And, you know, what do they mean?
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the other thing as well. And I think that's the beauty of it as well, as when you create these worlds. It's like, okay, I wonder what the lenses of Ikakarumba or even It's Shocker are going to be through Liana's eyes.
Sure. I mean, we have it evident, right? Like, Liana sees Ikakarumba very differently to how ZAU does.
Yeah.
And I think when we came up with Liana, I'm trying to remember what our main influence, I think it was like Ghibli.
Yeah, it was very kind of
like Totoro.
Yeah.
About how, like, there are essentially two different stories happening in Totoro. You've got the perspective of the children, but then occasionally you just see past that lens for the father, and then it goes back to the children's perspective of the father. And I just think that's always been fascinating, how we always see stories through the perspective, right? I mean, that's the bedrock of Bantu mythology, is oratory storytelling.
Absolutely.
If I tell that story to you, it's going to be very different because I'm saying it through my perspective.
Through your perspective, and if I was to share that story to someone else, and I think that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
It's the sense of it becomes relatable.
Yeah, the legend of Gargarib.
Yeah,
will be very different if you tell it to your little one.
Yeah,
than, you know, if we were to tell it in a pub.
Exactly.
Right. Like
exactly.
But because it's all about the perspective and the theme that which you take from it.
I think that was one of the big things that I think we really were inspired by as well, was this sense of how malleable a story can be depending on who you're telling it to. And I think in the same way, it kind of really relates to grief, in the sense of everyone's grief is their own personal journey. It isn't a thing that, you know, we can all share and relate to a degree. It's like, yes, you can go through it, but your grief is different to my grief.
Sure. Like a shared story, but with different acts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 Perfect. That felt
Buy
really
the game.
easy. Legend of ZAU.
Multiple copies.